Before this video starts, I'm gonna get into Hellblade 2, like really get into Hellblade 2, and also talk about the first one a decent bit. So Hellblade 2 is very much a game you should try out, especially if you have Game Pass or the game's on sale. I had a decent time with it, even if the video sounds kinda, sorta, really negative. TLDR, good game, but not half as good as the first one. Now, on with the rambling. So, Nvidia decided to give away Game Pass for free for 3 months to anyone with a decent Nvidia graphics card, and I happen to be one of those people, so I played Battlefield Hardline. Mom, I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up. But the game deleted my save data, so I deleted the game. Then I tried BlazBlue Cross Tag for like 15 to 20 minutes because it had Neo from Ruby but no crossplay, so that's another promising game that got killed off. And then I realized that Game Pass had Hellblade 2, and I personally really like the original Hellblade, so I figured I could save myself some money and play it now. Maybe buy it later on Steam for repeat playthroughs if I ever got rich enough. So a good chunk of the reason why I really liked this franchise was how well the game handled its depiction of psychosis. Senua is schizo as hell, so schizo in fact that the first game has her finding Hella to throw hands, while she has her dead husband's decapitated head in a bag as she deals with voices in her head. Also, side note, while I was making this video I found out that Senua is Scottish. Side note to that side note, I got the Scottish homie to yell into his AirPods just for this bit. So, for the sake of keeping this video short-ish, I'm gonna talk about gameplay and other more bigger picture differences between the two games, and then we'll get to plot-specific things. While the focus of the plot segment is going to be the second game, I can't really help but draw comparisons and bring up events of the first game, so yeah, we'll keep things spoiler-free for this part, and I'll let you know when we're getting to spoiler territory. Although, I'll be using footage from every stage of the game, so if you want a completely blind playthrough, now would be a great time to log off. Oh, and spoilers for the first game starting now. When I first started playing Senua's Sacrifice, I played a game, well, another one, in parallel. Okay, this is kind of hard to word. So I did this thing where I tried to, as a neurotypical dude who has no experience with mental illnesses outside of being called autistic by strangers on the internet,
I have autism.
Find out what was actually going on underneath all the hallucinations. And yeah, I gave up pretty quick. We know that the first game was going on more or less entirely in Senua's head. I'd like to imagine Senua just pulling up to the shores of Iceland or wherever the game's set and just getting high on a mushroom or something, and that's where all this takes place. It was hard to tell what part of the hallucination was a hallucination. You just knew that Senua was an unreliable narrator. Hell, the narrator of this game and the second game is a voice in her head. Senua's all alone fighting her insecurities, her grief, and her bitterness towards herself for not being normal in a foreign land. Not that the people from her tribe treated her much better. She had an abusive father who killed her mother because of her mental illness and made life hell for her, her only respite being her husband, Dillian, who got Alt F4'd by the Vikings. So, that wasn't very nice. I swear, this video is a structure, I just don't know what it is yet. Anyways, let's talk about the gameplay shit. So, something that I really liked about the second game was how it was all done in one cut. A lot like the 2018 reboot of God of War and its sequel. Probably the PC port isn't out yet, but it will be soon, so yeah. The camera work in general is just phenomenal in this game, or well, I loved it anyways. It knows when to stay still, it knows when to move and how much it's supposed to move. If Senua's in a cramped space, the camera angle and movement reflects that claustrophobia, and overall I'd say that the camera is a huge part of how well the game's presented. The first game tried to do the one cut thing, but there were cuts between some flashbacks and chapters. It wasn't much, but it was there. This game, much like its predecessor, doesn't waste your time. Not a lot of it anyways. It has a story to tell, it tells it, and then leaves. Which, in my opinion, is a great quality to have in a AAA game. Most of them just drag on forever. The combat in this game had a few downgrades. We will get to that later. But one thing it does is that it adds a certain weight to the individual strikes. Maybe it's the camera shake, I don't know, but the combat in the previous game, although competent, felt floaty and weightless a lot of times. This time it feels like Senua swinging her sword and hitting flesh and muscle and bone. Even though that doesn't actually really happen until the part where you kill them, but we can cut the game some slack. The point I'm trying to make is that Senua's situation in the second game is a desperate one, and to reflect that, the combat is in turn brutal and desperate. You can hear how tired Senua is with each swing, and that's something that I really like. Any normal human being, if put through so many sword fights with so little rest, will be exhausted. Hell, I'd probably collapse halfway through myself. The visuals, well, everyone's beaten this horse to death, and for a good reason. The game looks gorgeous. Just don't turn off the LSS. Even with the LSS, the game has a few stutters, but it was stable for the most part, for me anyways. The audio design is kind of a mixed bag for me, because I really like how they used binaural audio for the Furies, but also the Furies can get kinda annoying. But I guess that's less of an audio design thing and more of a writing thing. This is kind of a plot point, so minor spoilers I guess, but unlike the previous game where Senua was facing everything by herself, this game gives her a group. A small group, but a group nonetheless. And honestly, I'm not too sure how I feel about this, because the group dynamic is decent and allows us to see a side of Senua that we otherwise would probably never have seen, but some of these encounters just don't feel organic. We'll get back to this later. One thing that everyone loves to praise this game for is the facial animation, which is good, but it's brought down by the fact that a lot of times it's exaggerated for no reason. Like, we get it, guys. You have a really good mocap system, but the quality of a system like that really shines if it can capture the subtle side of the human face, and not some Scottish woman showing us her teeth all the time. I swear she talks through her teeth in this game. This is kind of why with Quantum Break and every Remedy game that came after it, they were flexing the subtle bits of the actor's performance that they could capture with their mocap system. I'm not gonna shit on the animations too much because they are good, but we need to understand that exaggerating expressions is not a good way to show off facial animations. I kinda hate how games and anime tend to do this thing where overacting is equated with good acting. I really needed to say this because the voice performances were great. Melina Juergens is amazing as Senua, and the game has moments where the actors are allowed to convey and express emotions without saying or doing much, and that's where the game shines. It's just that those moments aren't as many as I'd have liked. It's almost like the game doesn't trust its actors. Okay, so for the bad side of the combat. Unlike the previous game, this game has combat encounters play out in a 1v1. There are parts where the combat takes place in groups, but even in those situations, the other enemies just sit at the sideline waiting for you to finish off the dude you're currently fighting, which means that the Furies in this game are reduced to molds planted by Big Yap, except that one combat interaction. In the previous game, the Furies served a functional purpose. They would help you out in combat by telling you about enemies approaching you from behind and telling you to block or evade depending on the attack that's thrown your way. It wasn't something that the devs had to do, but it was a nice touch in the original, and it probably won't be a thing now. Also, there was a hidden combo system in the first game that just seems to be gone now. If I tried to chain lights and heavies, the game wouldn't get me a new combo that the game never told me about. It would just reset to the heavy or the light chain that the game had. Again, this is probably a minor gripe of mine because a lot of people may not even have known about the combo system in the first game, but I kinda miss little touches like that, and arguably my biggest gripe with the combat was how unnecessary it was. Throughout the entire story, I only really felt like the game needed a combat sequence around 3 to 4 places, but the game needed to be a game, and we had combat sequences that I felt were thrown in as an afterthought. I get that people ridicule this game for being a walking simulator, but honestly, I would have been perfectly fine with the game being one. Hell, I'd go out of my way to say that it would have been better if it was a walking sim. Some of the best moments in this game come from when the game is on rails and is more walking sim than hack and slash. I get that a walking sim doesn't have the mass appeal that hack and slash games have, and that with this game they try to appeal to player bases of both walking sims and hack and slash games, but unlike Hi-Fi Rush, which managed to appease player bases of both genres of games, it just ended up being a game that couldn't appeal to either and just lives in a niche of its own. And probably my biggest gripe, and something I'm sure a lot of y'all have noticed by now, are these black bars at the bottom, at the top and bottom of the screen. I don't know when and I don't know why we as a species looked at black bars in a video and just collectively yelled, "Oh, so cinematic." Oh fuck, I think I peaked. I don't know, maybe I'd be worshipping black bars as some cinematic innovation as well if I had a degree in film, but unfortunately I am a gamer. Even worse, I have a YouTube channel. So I'm gonna get into the plot now. This game delves really deep into psychosis and mental illness, and just like the first game, it has a feature thingy that you can watch, and it's an interesting watch. It's like 20 minutes, and it's a pretty good watch. I'd recommend it. After a quick-ish recap of the previous game, we see that Senwa's allowed herself to get captured by the Northmen so that she can stop the raids on her people. Yeah, there's no real plan, to be honest. There wasn't one last time either, only a goal. And I kinda respect that whatever happens attitude. Anyways, while on her way to Iceland, the Northmen's ships run into a storm, and after this quick shot of this oddly well-modeled man, my frame rate get a little trolling. With Senwa underwater and my frame rate back to normal, we have a bit of dread, a bit of survival. I just want to point out how funny it is that my frame rate tanked anytime Senwa surfaced, never turning off DLSS ever again. With my settings fixed, Senwa washes up on shore, self-doubt already setting in. We have this partially interactive opening credits sequence interrupted by my friend asking me how the game is. Dog, it's only been 10 minutes. Anyways, this entire sequence is cool and all, but I don't get why AAA games insist on having me play through the credits instead of just letting them roll out in a cutscene. It's easier to do and takes away nothing from the experience, but that's just me. During the credits, we see Shadow again, and this time I feel like it's more obvious that Shadow's supposed to be her father. This time Shadow is a hooded figure, unlike last time where he was just a head, but I'm guessing that's because they had the time and the budget to model him instead of a crusty MP4. Now that we're done having a manic episode, Senwa realizes that she needs to search for survivors and rescue them, which she doesn't do an extremely good job of, for obvious reasons. Droot's stories make a return, which, cool. After beating herself up for not being able to save the slaves and the autosave or loading icon doing weird things, and one of those schizo puzzles from the last game, she gets a sword, and a sword in a video game means combat. In the last game, the enemy spoke with what I'm going to go out on a limb and say is gibberish. And initially, hearing the slaver speak the same, I just took that as Senwa not being able to understand whatever Nordic language her attackers were conversing in. Until...
I don't believe in human rights.
Man, I'm dead.
An arrogant man loses to Senua. After defeating man, Senua sees the same rot in him that was inflicted on her in the first game, which makes one thing clear. This man is literally Senua for real on God. Senua spares man, which, you know, she needs to spare him because she needs him to show her the way. On their way, man explains how his father is the leader of that particular region of the world, and then they come across a settlement which had been raided and overrun by Droggers. I'm just gonna say Droggers because that's how most games and media pronounce that word. So, anyways, who are the Droggers? We don't know yet, but man is extremely scared by their presence and tells Senua to avoid that settlement, but her schizo powers tell her that she's needed inside. I'm honestly confused. Druth told Senua practically everything there is to know about Norse myth, but she doesn't know what the Droggers are. You'd expect someone who had spent a decent amount of time there and then escaped to have run into or at least have heard of them before he made it back. So she goes in, and after some schizo puzzle solving and some flashbacks involving her mother, where she gets the mirror from the first game that is necessary for these crystallized enemies. This flashback is important because it kind of shows how Shadow is a manifestation of Senua's self-doubt and self-hatred. He was an abusive parent who always made sure that Senua always thought that she'd always be a burden at best for the people around her, and even in death he makes sure to drag her down, always pinning the blame for anything bad happening on her. In other words, she's just like me for real on God. After a minor case of a major skill issue where I got stuck on some rocks and couldn't move, Senua moves on to finally see the Droggers in action, and upon further investigation sees that they're going to sacrifice the village members for a ritual. Also, bro isn't eating, he is caressing. Making her way to the ritual site discreetly, Senua finds a dude tied to a sacrificial altar, and she can somehow hear him? Like, I get the schizo thing in the previous game, but this is an actual person. How the hell is this happening? You can't explain this away as Senua being a quirky schizo girl. You'll notice things like these happening with no explanations given, which just... Also, while helping the villagers, or whatever's left of them anyways, there's a minor point of conflict that gets brought up about how Senua should just let them suffer for all that these people have done to her people, but Senua helps because Druth was an outsider who helped her while she was in exile, and these particular people were not the ones who wronged her, or at least I think that was a part of why. Anyways, after seeing a random woman with a sword step in, the rest of the men of the village go, wait, we have swords too. Some of us are even trained in using them. We could, like, I don't know, put up a fight or something. So, the people of the village are cannon fodder to explain why this entire combat sequence is happening one-on-one, and anyone during this sequence who isn't Senua is only here to die, so, you know. This is like one of the 3 times where combat doesn't feel like it was thrown in as an afterthought. After fighting off a good chunk of the Droggers, Senua frees the man, and we learn that his name is Fargrimmer, and then the Droggers summon something called Iltoiga, who had been stalking Fargrimmer's settlement. He had come to this village to ask them for help, but that didn't work out, obviously. Fargrimmer and Senua escape barely, only surviving because Iltoiga only comes out at night. And by the time the summoning was completed, the sun had risen, so, you know, there's that. We also find out that man is called, well, I'll just call him Thor. Thor's people and Fargrimmer and his people have something of a disagreement with how things are handled. See, the entire region is plagued by giants, and Thor's people use human sacrifices to keep themselves safe from the giants. In Thor's eyes, it's a necessary evil, and Fargrimmer's refusal to accept their protection is a stupid idea that will lead to the death of his people. Allegedly, the giants are unkillable, but they haven't met Senua yet. The entire setup for the giants kind of reminds me of the town in From, but instead of many monsters, there's one giant per area or settlement, however you want to look at it. On reaching Fargrimmer's settlement, Senua has her first encounter with a giant.
Move! Why does she move? You can't. She's frozen. Stupid. What can you do? Look at her. Tiger. Fear coming forward. She was reaching for something. She wants him. Quick, save him. Quick! She was brave. She's stupid. She can see into you. She wants to be monsters. She is like us. She is suffering like you. We can see her. She knows you. He was helping us. No! You saved him, remember? Yes, he saved me. Stop thinking. Stop thinking. Hide, sir! She will not spare you again. Go! She's coming back!
After all that, we learned that after a volcanic eruption, the barrier between Midgard and Jotunheim was torn apart, and that led to the giants just popping in and tearing shit up, and for whatever reason, Senua looks at Thor and says, "I can fix him." Also, Senua brings up killing gods, aka the events of the previous game, but we all know that was more or less all in her head. But this time, the giants are entities that everyone see and acknowledge and fight or run away from, which is interesting to say the least. Senua then has Shadow mocking her and telling her that she needs to listen to him. Now, knowing what we know, it's pretty cool to see how sometimes when Shadow talks sense, he can be interpreted as Senua trying to justify what her father did. It's something that I appreciate because abuse at the hands of your parents isn't something that you can just walk off after knowing that it happened or after a boss fight, and the fact that Shadow isn't a boss fight in this or previous game is something that I really appreciate. Her father and the scars he left can't just be shrugged off, and even if she recognizes how terrible a person he was and that his actions were just plain wrong, he's still her father, and that is something that she'll just have to live with. Senua then proceeds to dispel darkness with literal light. Holy shit, Alan Wake reference? This entire sequence is clearly an episode that Senua is having, and I'm just trying to imagine Fargrimmer and Thor looking at Senua having a manic episode as soon as she says that she's killed gods. I want a director's cut of this game which shows the reaction. That would be so funny. Fargrimmer then calls Senua a seer. Holy shit, undone reference? He also tells her that if there's a way to stop the giants, only the hidden folk would know how it's done. But they won't just tell her how it's done, they'll test her. Failing their tests could potentially end up with her dead. And before anyone says this, the hidden folk aren't a hallucination because Fargrimmer's met them once and passed their tests. So instead of Fargrimmer going there, Senua goes alone. It's never really explained, but I guess the hidden folk only help you through one crisis. It's the only explanation I can think of. A good chunk of the part where she makes her way to the hidden folk is just puzzle solving. Ooh, dead body, more puzzle solving, token combat sequence. Because the devs were scared of the players falling asleep. I kinda dig some of the puzzles in the cave where you use light to materialize or remove terrain to make your way through the section. It's pretty cool. The hidden folks test, as expected, gets quite testicle and they start playing on her fears and try to drive her insane. But our Senua has the mental fortitude of an insane asylum inmate. The section has these zombie enemies and yeah, they're nothing special. Also, I like how they deep fried the voice lines for the Furies to show that Senwa's terrified in this section of the cave without her torch. We see Senwa give her sword, her only defense against the horrors of the cave, to someone in need on the other side of that hole thingy. Very noble, very cool. The next sequence just has her walk past the zombies and make her way through the cave. Has a nice moment with the Furies, and then she learns from the hidden folk that after the volcanic eruption, the land was left mostly uninhabitable because it's a volcanic eruption, of course it was, and a woman desperate for her baby's survival looked for a way. Side note, it strongly hinted that the lack of food led to some people turning to cannibalism, and these people are probably the Draugrs. As things got worse, she left her baby to the hidden folk in hopes that they raised her child, and then, knowing that she left her child to die, is consumed by her anger and despair, turning into Iltoiga.
She made a deal. I will give myself to you, Askia, if you will give me the power to triumph in this world you have created. Take my life and give me your death.
And then Senwa gets surrounded by Draugrs. Then she finds another one of those hole thingies, and turns out that person she gave the sword to, it was Senwa. I know damn well the writers were patting themselves on the back for this one, but for me personally, this was just weird. Like, you realize if she never threw her sword away, she'd never be vulnerable, including at this part, and she would never have to yell into a hole begging for a sword. Like, off the top of my head, they wanted to show Senwa as the capable person who's more than her sword and puts others before her to set her up for her role as a leader, right? Then put someone else in danger. Make her actually help another person. This could have been an interesting moment. We could have seen Senwa as this smart, capable, and heroic person, where she works with a huge handicap that she created for herself to help a person in need, but that doesn't happen. Of course it doesn't happen. Maybe I'm just reading this wrong, I don't know. I could be swayed with a solid enough reasoning, but this doesn't really sit right with me. Anyways, after some token combat, Senwa finds out that she can't really kill the giants. The giants were once human, and they lost a part of themselves by doing things that turned them into giants. So to defeat the giants, she needs to know their real human name and then help them. Iltoiga's real name is Ingun, and Senwa just finds her baby skeleton, and then Fargrimmer just hops in and confirms that names have power. Armed with that knowledge, Fargrimmer performs a ritual to summon Iltoiga so that Senwa can help her, and honestly, this is a well done sequence. I like it. It does what it set out to do. Senwa helps Ingun by destroying the shackles of rage and despair that bind her, and then reunites the mother with her baby, freeing Ingun from a hell of her own making. A Senwa who had to work through her own grief from when she lost Dillion, helping another person work past her own grief by doing the least that she could do, allowing Ingun to see her baby one last time. Shadow even draws parallels between the two, although in less wholesome terms. Anyways, after seeing a giant die, Thor realizes that with Senwa, the slave trade will finally stop, because if the giants are defeated, there won't be a need for sacrifices, and he's hype about it, admitting that he never really liked it and considered it a necessary evil. Fargrimmer decides to join Senwa and Thor and act as an additional witness. It's also implied that defeating the giants takes a toll on Senwa. Don't worry, this toll is just Senwa being tired, nothing a nice nap can't fix. Also, the hidden folk are now just a permanent addition to the entourage of voices in her head, because I don't know, I just don't know. And like, honestly, just roll with it. It's not that bad. I'm just feeling bitchy. On their way, they come across another settlement. This one openly hostile to the Bjorg, aka Thor's tribe, or whatever. I mean, that's kind of sort of really obvious. Led by Astrid. Fargrimmer explains to Astrid that Senwa can defeat giants. Hearing this, Astrid asks Senwa to defeat the giant that stalks her settlement. This is also when the game starts pushing Senua in the leader role with less subtlety. No shit to talk about this. Not yet, anyways. Just a detail that I wanted to point out. We learn a little bit about Astrid, just how her father was the leader of her village and how she lost her family to the Bjorg. I'm kinda not sure if her brothers died because of the Bjorg or they died trying to fight the giant. Anyways, after a rather tedious sequence of puzzles, not hard, there wasn't much to figure out, there was just a lot of walking back and forth for some 10 minutes to solve the puzzle. I just hate backtracking when it's done to just pad out a game's length. We learned that the giant used to be a member of Astrid's tribe who, to save himself, sold out Astrid's father to the Bjorg. Everyone else found out and they, as expected, exile him. All alone and in exile, Homeboy turned into a giant. Knowing the giant is someone Astrid knows, Senua goes to her to ask her the giant's name. After learning the giant's name and Senua explaining to Astrid how the giants are created, the settlement gets attacked by Draugrs. Also, I love this bit.
Oh no, I'm falling!
Much like the combat sequence where you find Fargrimmer, a lot of people just die. But in this case, it's kind of important because this time Senua blames herself for everything that happens, because the Draugr would usually stay away from Astrid's settlement, but the day Senua comes, the Draugr come knocking too. Jesus, my frame rate took a hit during this section. More or less, this was probably the best combat sequence in the game. It was where the band was officially together. Senua, Thor, and Astrid fighting together was pretty cool, and overall, this entire fight was just really well done. The aftermath of the fight is that Senua decides that her father was right and that she should leave before more people get hurt, but then Astrid shows up, so she's staying now. I respect that. So this is where the game starts delving with much less subtlety into the other theme of being better than the people before you and that children are not their parents. It's a theme that's about to get really, really important, but first, Fargrimmer performs another ritual to let Senua do her thing, but first the giant needs to be lured out, which is something that Senua and Astrid's people decide to do. This is more or less a turning point for Senua as a character because now she's actively leading other people into a fight. She'd still rather be the one doing all the fighting, but now she's also taking other people with her, knowing damn well that she can't do everything on her own. And this is pretty cool because Senua's always had the fear of letting other people down, and we saw in the cave sequence while learning Ingun's name that it's more important to her to help and save other people than even her own life at times. But in a situation like this, casualties are more or less a guarantee. I just hate that the game never really talked about this. It was just thrown in and then forgotten about more or less instantly. So, you know, this is also arguably the best sequence in the game, and me describing it is never going to do it any justice, so I'll just let it play out.
Come this way.
Death is coming. You know what you have to do.
Can you smell their fear?
He's here. Death is coming.
Look at the bones.
Death is coming.
Look at the bones. That's going to be you. That's going to be What makes you think?
Stay down. Hush.
I'm not really sure what happens at this part. The Wikipedia page says that Senua absolves him of his guilt, but like, she's an outsider with zero authority. This man never knew her. Like, how? I just imagine Senua walking up to him and telling him that all's forgiven and the giant just going, I really want to see what everyone else sees during this. Like, I know that you can unlock the other characters as voices that you can hear in future playthroughs, but I want to see their perspective, not hear it. Anyways, now Senua, Thor, Fargrimmer, and Astrid. Wait, Astrid? Okay, I know that we want a merry band for our adventures, but why is Astrid with Senua instead of, you know, helping her people rebuild? The game outright says that Astrid is the glue holding her people together. Fargrimmer is here to act as a guide, witness, and he performs all the funny rituals. Thor is a witness, and he's supposed to help Senua stop the slave trade, but what's Astrid doing here? Our group makes it to a town that Astrid and Thor advise against going through. These two have seen and lived through some shit, but they're too scared to go in because no one comes out sane, and as soon as you go in, Thor and Astrid begin to get jumpy. Senua, on the other hand, stays calm. Well, you know, as calm as she can be. All that time by herself in exile finally paying off. Fargrimmer tries to calm everyone else, but he's kinda shook too. Everyone gets separated and Senua finds them one by one, and what I love about this part is how Senua is shown as a leader who is distinctly different from her father. Like, she guides them through the ordeal with a gentle hand and makes sure that everyone gets out safely instead of choosing between people and leaving some behind as her father would. Yes, that is what I think the choice meant. Her father probably would have left one of these two to die. Probably Fargrimmer because he's in a fighter, but who knows. Also, I can't find an instance of Fargrimmer being called that before or after this scene. I'm genuinely confused. Did Senua come up with this, or did he tell her that off screen? So Senua then finds Thor, who's been having an episode of his own, but recovers just in time for us to not see what his traumatic past was. Just enough to know that things are going to get rough once we get to his father. There's no combat or much in the way of world building in this entire chapter, but it does help us understand the kind of people Fargrimmer and Astrid are. Once they get to Thor's settlement, our merry band sees a bunch of people tied up as offerings to the giants. With the light of day running out, the team decides that Astrid and Fargrimmer will rescue the people intended to be sacrificed, while Thor and Senua will go talk to Thor's father about everything. Obviously, things don't go well, and instead of listening to his son, Thor's father decides to sacrifice Senua when he finds out that the offerings have escaped. Like, as soon as this man starts talking about the giants, he starts talking about them as an authority figure and considers their authority absolute, and then proceeds to use that absolute authority to establish his authority as absolute, so you know that shit's fishy. I also like how Thor doesn't simply come out and start fighting his father. The decision to defy his father is a decision that he needs to actively make, and the decision that tears him apart, but in the end, he wasn't his father and he chose to do right by his people, even if it meant going against his family. Also, I like how this world's equivalent of normal pills is smacking someone on the head. Can you imagine a Nordic therapist just telling people's parents to smack their kids 3 times a day after diagnosing them with schizophrenia? Anyways, after another combat sequence, because game needs to game, Thor finally sides with Senua and against his father, who is the giant, actually. But before that can happen, the hidden folk take us through his backstory. We find out that after the volcanic eruption, Thor's father stepped up and led his people to see his people into a better time. Everything he said, he meant, and then things did get better, and because things got better, he saw the people no longer scared for their lives, living their own lives because they didn't really need his leadership anymore. He was a leader who ruled through fear, and with nothing to be scared of, his leadership was a relic of the past, and he didn't really like that idea. So he made the giants to give the people something to be scared of. How did he make the giants? Good question. That's never really explained. God, I really hated this. Like, the concept is great, but it just isn't given enough room to breathe. You can tell they really wanted to get to the end as soon as they could, and while playing the game, I couldn't really tell why. The game almost always barely missed the mark for me as far as the plot was concerned, but once I got to this part, I realized that it was because the game never gave any of its plot threads enough time to actually play out, or it would hand-wave some questions which, to someone like me, were important. Thing is, the previous game is around the same length as this game, but it was doing a lot less in terms of the sheer number of story threads that were in the game. So everything was given the time and attention by the writers that those threads needed to play out well. Getting back to the game, Thor lost the fight against his father, and in his dying moments, he tells Senua his father's name to allow her to defeat the giant, and his name is Alpha Male. Shut up, I can't pronounce any of these names and I refuse to butcher any of them. Anyways, boss fight happens. Quick question, if there are no giants, what about these two? Everyone saw them, everyone saw you kill them. Game, why do you refuse to make sense? Anyways, the crowd, realizing that Alpha Male is a fraud, starts cheering for Senua. You couldn't have, like, helped or something? Anyways, Senua beats him in front of everyone. A nice touch about this part is how both father and son were tackled by Senua at the end of their fights, and she almost crushed their heads with a rock, but where Thor accepted death at the hands of an enemy combatant who had outsmarted him, and knew that the life he lived meant that if he slipped up, he'd most certainly be dead. Alpha Male, on the other hand, is cowering, almost pleading, hoping to God that Senua shows mercy. Senua then decides to be better than her father and spares Alpha Male, and then this happens.
We are not our fathers. There is always a choice. You taught me that.
We will choose. Together.
You decide.
All her life she's been alone. A hymn to still the other voices, the ones outside. Not anymore. The ones she saved, the names she found, they lift her up. Their hands reach out to hers. And now, she reaches back to them. Her story is not written. There is always a choice.
So, two things. First, this ending just happened. Like, when I was first playing through the game, I just went, wait, that's it? No, all my questions were not answered, and yes, I get how the ending established her as a leader strengthened by her people, who isn't a power-hungry tyrant. This entire ending felt like it was an hour's worth of story that they just compressed into some 15 minutes. Best analogy that I can come up with for this ending is how Tom King usually writes endings for his comics. They just happen, which works well in a thriller or typical psychological horror setting, but this felt like God of War with psychological horror elements sprinkled in. Let's be real, this was clearly supposed to be Microsoft's God of War killer, but the problem was that instead of making a new God of War competitor, Microsoft decided to get Ninja Theory to make Hellblade their God of War killer, which could have worked if and only if the game was allowed to have the time that it needed to allow the writers to make that transition, because as things stood, Hellblade was not a game that could have operated in the same headspace as God of War, and by trying to be both God of War and Hellblade, it kinda ended up losing what made the first game as good as it was. kinda wonder what this game would have been if Ninja Theory wasn't bought out by Microsoft and they decided to keep that indie AAA model that they had with the previous game. Second, I just hate sequel bait. Like, they left the story hanging like that because they wanted sequels. Games can have both endings and sequels. It's possible. It's been done before. Hell, Ubisoft, as much as I hate them, did it with Watch Dogs. Like, come on. Don't be like that. And the thing is, I genuinely had a good time with this game. Compared to most AAA slop that we've grown accustomed to, this really is a good game. But I know, and you know, that there's better games that you could be playing right now. The visual presentation is top notch, and sometimes the strong visual presentation makes me feel like this game was made for people to make edits out of. What really gets to me is that there's so much good here, but it just barely misses the mark, and that pisses me off more than I would have been if this was a bad game. I don't think that the game's bad. At the end of the day, I'm just sad that I'll forget about the game a week after this video's out, unlike the first game, which stayed in my memory for months. A comparison that I couldn't help but draw was with Plague Tale. Now, bear in mind, as of me making this video, I haven't finished Plague Tale Requiem. But for me, the 3-ish hours of that game that I've played, it feels like the type of sequel that I wanted this game to be. Maybe I have a change of heart once I get into that game, but Amicia as a character is built up on by both events prior to the first game and the events of the first game. Her actions in Requiem can be traced back to the shit she had to go through during the first game. This 15-year-old watched the Inquisition kill off her parents and everyone else that she knew and cared for. And then she had to go out of her way to kill and maim for a brother who was, for all intents and purposes, a stranger. There's more to those games, but you get the idea. And most importantly, the macula isn't used to just hand-wave half the plot away like Senua's psychosis is in this game. Do they just do that shit later in Requiem? I don't know, I didn't get that far yet. But the psychosis was used as a just roll with it tool in both games. Only this game, it can't be used that well because we have other neurotypical people with us and we see their reactions to everything. Well, not everything, but everything that matters. What really gets me is that not only is this game meh as a sequel, the events of this game retroactively call the events of the first game into question. Anyways, sequel. Make it happen, Ninja Theory.